I'm Pastor Joel Webben with Right Response Ministries, and this is another episode of our show called Questions. Today's question is as follows: who should we blame for Afghanistan? Who should we blame for Afghanistan? To flesh the question out a bit more, further written is this: thousands of American citizens are currently stranded in Afghanistan, as well as tens of thousands of American allies. Who's to blame for this massive failure? Is it Joe Biden's fault from pulling out so quickly? Is it Donald Trump's fault due to his previous deal with the Taliban? Is it the men in Afghanistan's fault because of their unwillingness to fight? Or is it America's fault in general because of our obsession with imperialism? Again, in summation, the question is, who should we blame for Afghanistan? All right, so let me go ahead and just go down the list. I think there's a lot of people to blame. First person to blame, a person who deserves by far the most blame, President Joe Biden. Absolutely, unequivocally, it's his fault. There's no question. Did Trump make a deal with the Taliban during his tenure as president of the United States? Yes. But nowhere in the deal did it say that we had to pull out of Afghanistan with this method, with this strategy, or perhaps we should say the lack thereof. The sudden, thoughtless, and really arrogant method of withdrawing our troops from Afghanistan falls solely on the shoulders of President Joe Biden. He was warned by many advisors in his cabinet saying this is not the way to go. I mean, you can go back to July, just 5-6 weeks ago, and hear him saying, this is nothing like Saigon. This is not like Vietnam. You're not going to see helicopters coming and taking people off of the roof of an embassy to evacuate them. And now he is eating his words. But instead of eating his words, what he's doing is hiding out in Camp David and watching Matlock. Or what he's doing is showing up for a brief press conference and talking about COVID. Joe Biden needs COVID right now. Liberals, Democrats in our nation, they need COVID. They need as many people to get rocked by COVID as possible because they need anything and everything to take the focus off of the massive failure of President Joe Biden. So it is first and foremost his fault. It's not merely that we pulled out of Afghanistan, but the method that has caused so much madness. So I believe that the blame first and foremost falls on our president of the United States, President Joe Biden. Trump, with his deal, getting out of Afghanistan, I don't know. There's a lot of debate to be had. I know some of you, maybe you've listened to Ben Shapiro. He would argue that we should stay in Afghanistan forever. And he would say, hey, we've got troops, in close to 100 countries around the world at any given moment. We've got people in Germany, people in Japan. The difference is these are actual countries. These are actual nations. Afghanistan is really more of a territory than a nation. It's never really stabilized. It's never really set up a stable government. Lord knows that we've tried over the last 20 years, but it hasn't been particularly successful. And yet you could still make an argument and say, hey, this territory is so strategic at a global level that we just can't afford to hand this territory over to the Taliban. And then knowing that the Taliban may make concessions and deals and partnerships, make allies with Russia or China, which is what it looks like is going to be happening. And so you can make an argument that we should have kept a skeleton force of 2,500 troops or so in Afghanistan indefinitely, not because it's a country like our troops in Japan or Germany, but because it's a strategic area and we cannot afford to lose it. That's a reasonable argument. Or you could say, hey, look, we got to get out of Afghanistan because at the end of the day, the people of Afghanistan, they need to take ownership of their own nation. And we can't be there forever. That's another argument. What you know is a failure, all right? So there's some validity on both sides of that equation. Let's stay there forever because we can't afford to lose this territory to ISIS or the Taliban, and knowing that they may make concessions and partnerships and become allies with very dangerous nations such as China or Russia. So that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is we need to get out of there. The Afghan people, they need to take it. They need to own this. That's another argument. Both of those have some validity to it. But what we know is absolutely fallacious and ridiculous is let's get out of there and let's do it arrogantly, let's do it presumptuously, let's do it without hardly any strategy, without any forethought. So at the end of the day, the deal that Trump made of getting out of it, you can make an argument for that. You can make an argument against it. You can say that was a bad deal. But at the end of the day, Trump set up a ton of things with his administration. And that was Biden's whole platform, is that he was going to undo every single thing that Trump did within his first, 100 days in office? I mean, how many executive orders did Joe Biden overturn from the previous administration within his first 100 days in office? And he bragged about it. And now all of a sudden he said, well, my hands were tied. Trump made this bad deal. Well, Trump's bad deal didn't cover the way you pull out of Afghanistan. And you could have just said, hey, I'm not going to hold to the deal. We're not going to do this deal. Just like everything else that Trump did that Biden has reversed and gotten out of. So it's not Trump's fault. It's not. It's for sure Joe Biden's fault for the way that he pulled out of Afghanistan. Right now, America looks weak. And that's really kind of been our motto. That's been our motto, really, since, Obama, maybe even before. But we had this brief break where Trump came in and we had some resemblance of strength. And a lot of people say, well, he was just shooting from the hip and he was a wild card and it wasn't strength, it was craziness. But the reality is that a lot of foreign nations and foreign leaders, they listened to Trump. Even though American citizens didn't appreciate what he said, they didn't like his Twitter account, it worked. In terms of foreign policy, Trump was heavy-handed and he achieved a lot. He achieved virtually peace in the Middle East for a brief while. Trump did better on foreign policy than really any president we've had in the last couple decades. And part of it was because of a strength and a heavy-handedness. But the motto that we've had for a while now, and certainly with our current administration, is America last. America last. And I don't know whether that just comes out of the whole woke, critical race theory, Marxist agenda. This idea that, white colonialism and imperialism and white supremacy and all these things are bad things. There's this really toxic, poisonous, destructive theology of weakness that Americans love right now. It's so hot right now, this theology of weakness. People really, really like it. And it's really caught on with evangelicals. And I think one of the reasons why is because of the pendulum overswinging, this overcompensation, right? So we're going to push back on the prosperity gospel. Benny Hinn and Kenneth Copeland and Joel Osteen, all these guys are heretics. There's no doubt about that. They are false teachers teaching that the favor of God can be earned, that it can be earned by our own works, by our own obedience, and many prosperity teachers and their doctrine, it's not even obedience, it's really just faith. Do you believe? Name it and claim it, right? The power of your own positive thought, being able to speak things into existence, the little God doctrines, all those kinds of things. You've heard Justin Peters come on our show and talk a lot about that. And so prosperity preaching, the prosperity heresy, it's real, it's dangerous, it's sending millions of people to hell. It's a big deal. The problem is I think that we have overcompensated to where we've gone from the prosperity gospel to a poverty gospel, to this, like David Platt's radical, right? That real Christianity, it gives up power. It throws power away. It goes and sells all your possessions and gives them to the poor. And really, you're not pleasing to Jesus unless you have cancer and you've moved to a third world country and you're a missionary and your children have died. And, that's the only testimony that's pleasing to the Lord. And that's a poverty gospel. The reality is that there are times where individual Christians are called to suffer. And all of us at various times will suffer. Nobody's going to get through this life without any degree of suffering. But at the same time, there's also something to be said for Christians Christian men particularly, taking a wife, having children, ideally having many children, because children are a blessing, a heritage from the Lord, blesses the man whose quiver is full, not handing those children over to the state, so not giving them to Caesar and then being surprised when they come back as Romans, but rather homeschooling them or putting them in a Christian school, not a school that with Christians in it, but a school with Christians who also give a Christian education, a Christian worldview, I would say preferably a classical Christian education, and then sending these children out like arrows into the world, all the while men working hard, building wealth, starting as much as you can, making yourself immune to cancel culture, right? So working quietly with your own hands so that you would be dependent on no one. So that means start your own business, start your own entertainment company, start podcasting, start recording, start building wealth, start buying property, own a home if you can, rather than renting. All these things, these are good things. Get out of debt. Some of the Dave Ramsey stuff that people are like, oh, well, that's dumb. No, it's not. A lot of it is good practical wisdom. And one of the reasons why conservatives continue to lose is because a big voting bloc for conservatives is evangelical Christians, and evangelical Christians, they think that the goal is losing. That's my point. They think that that's actually the goal, because that's what they've been taught by John Piper and David Platt and all these different guys, that you are successful if you're losing. The less influence you have, the less power you have, the less money you have, the less wealth you have, the less this, the less health you have, all these kind of things, that's how you're winning. And the reality is, no, we're losing. We're losing our country to a radical leftist totalitarian regime. And as we lose our nation, every other nation in the world is suffering. See, an America first mentality, you might think, well, that sounds selfish. That sounds nationalistic. That doesn't sound really Christian. All right, shouldn't it just be Christ first? Yeah, it should be Christ first. But part of putting Christ first is working hard to obey Christ's commandments in all of life. Right? That's the Doug Wilson motto, all of Christ for all of life. And one of the realms of life includes the life of culture and politics and the marketplace and entertainment and all these things. We want to go into all the world, right? And make disciples of all nations, baptizing them into the name of the triune God. And the last part of the Great Commission is teaching them to obey all of Christ's commands. And guess what? Christ has more commands than simply those commands which pertain to the church and the home. The Bible says more than just how to have a good marriage, how to be a good parent, and how to run a church. The Bible speaks to politics. Jesus is Lord is the most political statement that's ever been made. He wants it all. He is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And when we actually fulfill the Great Commission, we make disciples, we baptize them into the triune God, into the name of the triune God, and we teach them to obey all of Christ's commands. That means teaching them obedience in every sphere of human society. And that includes the sphere of civil governments. It includes the sphere of politics. And so if Christians in America, or in any nation for that matter, but let's just talk about America because that's our country, at least it's mine. I'm an American citizen, and I'm proud to be an American citizen. If I, as a Christian who lives in America, seek to fulfill the Great Commission faithfully, I'm going to disciple men who some of them may turn out to be pastors, but Lord willing, all of them, or at least the vast majority, will be husbands and fathers, and many of them will be business owners, and some of them will start publishing companies, and some of them will start schools, and some of them will start entertainment companies, and some of them will run for local office in government, and some may even find themselves on the national political stage. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And so part of the mentality is this, God is pleased when we're weak. And so we just need to divest ourselves of all resources, all wealth, all influence, all position, all power. And so Christians have done that. And then what's happened is that America has done that. Because as Christians have divested themselves of all power, conservatives, Christians being a massive voting bloc in the conservative political party, we've lost the nation. And then And then those who come to power, they also have this theology of weakness, but it's not a theology of weakness that's biblical, because there is something to be said for having this mind among us, right? Philippians 2, Jesus who emptied himself, right? And he humbled himself even to the point of death, even death on a cross. And that verse, it says that we should consider others as more significant than ourselves. All of that in Philippians 2. But the mindset is humility. It's not that we should self-sabotage. It's not self-sabotage. It's not shooting ourselves in the foot, right? In an objective sense, going out of our way to make ourselves weak. No, it's simply having a mindset of humility, considering others more significant than ourselves. It's not shooting ourselves in the foot and going out of our way to actually make ourselves weak. So here's my point. Imperialism. Imperialism is a good thing. And this is why. It's a good thing because, as Rushdoony said, it's not whether but which. It's not whether but which, right? So this idea that America can just isolate and we can just focus on ourselves, right? We can be like Sweden, we can be like Canada, right? We just, this neutral, isolated. Well, here's the deal. That's like the hobbits in the Shire, or maybe a better example would be the dwarfs, right? That they care nothing for the concerns of men, or for the concerns of the elves or the hobbits or anybody else in Middle Earth. And they hold themselves up in the mountain, right? In the mines of Moria. And they have this ever increasing lust for gold and for jewels and for silver, and they grew mad with their own obsession, their own greed, and more than just their greed for jewels, they were only self-concerned. They only cared, the dwarves are for the dwarves, right? That's another saying that's kind of mixing. That's C.S. Lewis with the Chronicles of Narnia. But the dwarves are for the dwarves, right? In the last battle. The point is, you can be for yourself and not care about being a player on a global stage and have this country that seems to be a place of freedom and a place of prosperity and a place of happiness, but eventually you're going to fall. Eventually, the sickness, right, the darkness, the void will be filled by someone else. So if America has this America last mentality, and we don't want, we abandon this idea of being a global force for benevolence and good, right? Because everybody says, well, we've never been good and all we've ever done is evil. Okay, look, America is not perfect. And I'm sure there are plenty of things that we've done wrong on the global stage, but it's not whether but which. It's not whether but which. So it's either America or it's China. Which empire, imperialism, which global empire would you rather live under? America or China? I would rather live under an empire that is American. And that's not just because I am an American, it's because I can read. And I have at least an ounce of logic, and I understand the events and the things that are happening in China. They don't care about individual liberty. They don't care about freedoms. Now you might say, well, America's heading that way. Yeah, it is. But America's still better than China. China has been there for a very long time. This police state totalitarian idea, at least that's somewhat recent in American history. That's recent. And I think there's still hope that conservatives and especially Christians in our nation can turn the tide. But China, and I'm not saying the people of China aren't wonderful people, I'm sure they are, but I'm talking about the Chinese government that rules the nation with an iron scepter. I don't want them ruling the global stage. And China continues to gain power because America continues to hand over influence, to hand over manufacturing, to hand over our economy, our wealth, all these different things. And Afghanistan is just one example. That void will be filled. And it's not just going to be filled by the Taliban, a bunch of, as Ben Shapiro says, 8th century, donkey riding barbarians. It's going to be filled by a major global player. And it's probably going to be China. And we're probably going to regret what happened. Now, again, that's not to say that we should have stayed there forever, although I think a skeleton crew, there's an argument to be made. However, I think there's also a legitimate argument to be made for us pulling out, but pulling out in such a way that the Afghan people could have owned that territory, owned that nation, and so the void would be filled, not by us if we actually pulled out, but filled by the Afghan people, not the Taliban, and soon to follow, likely, China. So imperialism, I think, is a good thing. It's not whether, but which. Imperialism, I don't even know if it's a good thing, but what I should say is it's an inevitable thing. And so I would like to have a good imperialistic force filling that role. And I think America has been that force. And I think that, I'm sure there have been plenty of mistakes, but I think that overall that has been a good thing. But who's going to partner with us now? Who wants to be Americans' allies now? I mean, all we've seen from this debacle is that America doesn't keep its promises. If you ally with America today, you have benefits. Tomorrow, you're going to be tortured by the Taliban. Right? So who's going to want to partner with America now? And we haven't just hurt American citizens. That's number one. That's the biggest thing we should be concerned about. And then American allies in terms of the Afghan people who partnered with us. But we've also hurt American allies, other countries in Europe who had people stationed in Afghanistan who are also currently stranded. And the reality is we're not going to get them all out. We're not going to make this August 31st timeline that Joe Biden set, and now he's gone back and made concessions and said, hey, we may need some more time. We might need an extension, even though he set the date, which was foolish. He should not have said, hey, we'll be out by this time. And now he's the one going back saying, well, maybe we're not going to be out by this time. Could we have more time? Well, now the Taliban is holding to it, saying, nope, that's what you said. We're sticking to it. Which means what's likely going to happen is that American citizens, much less American allies, are going to be brutally tortured and murdered, or America is going to become one of the biggest financial funders of the Taliban. We're going to be paying ransoms, hand over foot, to the Taliban. They've already acquired billions of dollars of our military equipment. And in addition to that, they're going to get handouts from America in order for us to get back the people that shouldn't have been stuck there in the first place. So first and foremost, yeah, it's Joe Biden's fault. Secondly, the idea of, well, is it America's fault in general? Is it this imperialistic idea? No, I really don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that we live in a global world through technology and through airplanes and the internet and social media and all these kind of, the world is a lot smaller now. And there just really is no such thing. It's just one nation living its own independent, isolated little bubble reality. That's just not how the world works anymore. Somebody is going to take the global stage. Somebody is going to attempt to expand their empire. And so if it's not us, it's going to be someone else. And the reason why I think it should be us is not just because I'm an American citizen and I think I'll benefit. The reason why I think America should fill that void and be the global superpower is because I think America, unlike any other nation, and not just currently on the face of the planet, but in human history, America has been founded uniquely on Christian principles in such a way that it has been the greatest force for good. We've seen what Germany looked like when it tried to expand an empire, and Japan. And we have seen China and what they're trying to do. We've seen Rome and its empire. That was a long time ago, but we saw that. We've seen various empires, not just nations throughout human history, but various empires. And America has been the only global force that has benefited, right? The whole tide rises when America puts itself first. That's what's so crazy about all this. America first policy makes every other nation better off. America last policy, it sounds like this good humility, theology of weakness kind of thing. But what it actually means is an America last policy it doesn't benefit all the other nations. It benefits one or two other nations, communist nations like China, that take advantage of America's self-deprecating policies, and they fill the void, and then they oppress all these other nations. So when America puts itself last, it doesn't benefit all these other nations in the world. When America puts itself last, it benefits the nations that actually take advantage, like China, and then they oppress all the other nations in the world. So yeah, America needs to be a strong nation. And we need to have an America first policy, because when America prospers, the whole world follows suit. I'm not saying that's without any flaws or without any sin or without any exceptions, but a strong America is good for the world. Now, here's the problem. part of what happened for 20 years in Afghanistan is this. We tried to export something that we no longer have. And what I mean by that is Islam does not lend towards freedom, prosperity. It doesn't lend towards happiness. It doesn't lend towards security. It doesn't lend towards any of those things. Islam lends towards oppression. Islam lends towards bondage, slavery, violence. But here's the deal. So does secularism. And that's all we did. That's all we are capable of doing currently as the nation of America is we're capable of going into a place, a territory like Afghanistan and saying, hey, you've been oppressed by something like Islam. Let's alleviate your burden and replace Islam with secularism. But the problem is secularism isn't much better than Islam. Secularism is also oppressive. Secularism is also takes away and robs people of personal liberty. Secularism doesn't produce anything. Secularism is a disease. And that's all really America has to export because we've gone apostate, because we have forsaken the Lord, because we've rebelled against him, because we've despised his commandments, and because we've refused to repent. We are a nation in rebellion. And so we're not a Christian nation. Not anymore, not currently. Or if we are, we're a Christian nation in a state of apostasy, almost to the point where it may be too late. And so all America can currently export, if we do rise to that global stage, if we do try to expand the empire and become this imperialistic force again, I don't know if it actually, this America First policy would be good in the ways that I think it previously was in the past, because what we'll now export in our imperialism will no longer be the Christian worldview, but rather it'll just be replacing Hinduism with secularism, Islam with secularism, communism with Marxism. What's the difference, right? It's like we would just be trading one pile of crap for another pile of crap. So I think America needs to have an America First policy. I think we need to fill the void. We need to have a global presence. We need to be strong, but we also need to be Christian. First and foremost, we need to be Christian. We need to repent. We need to turn to Christ. We need to obey his commandments. And then we need to get our nation straight first. We need to fix our problems. And then I think we need to come back on the stage and we need to stand up to tyrants like China and say, no, you don't get to rule the world. So whose fault is it? First and foremost, it's Joe Biden's. Is it the fault of Trump? I don't think so. Joe Biden could have just nixed the deal, and the deal didn't say, hey, you have to pull out in the most stupid way possible, which is what Joe Biden did. And it's not just stupid, it was arrogant. People warned him, he refused to listen. It's on him. So was it Trump's fault? No. Was it Biden's fault? Heck yes. What about the Afghan men? Do they share any blame in this? Yeah, I think so. I don't think they're the first people to blame. I think first and foremost, it falls on President Joe Biden. And you might say, well, but they didn't have any air support. They were completely dependent on American troops and all these kind of things they've been trained to do warfare this American way with air support and with these supplies and with mechanics. They had Zoom videos, trying to get American mechanics to help them, holding up a computer screen to an Apache helicopter and trying to get them to help fix this or fix that. Yeah. So see point A, Joe Biden really messed up, right? That's my first point. Joe Biden is at fault. But I don't think we can say that the men of Afghanistan are not at fault at all. Statistically, we've seen these kinds of things happen before. And I was recently listening to Ali Bestaki, and she said that in these kinds of scenarios, that statistics bear that 90% of the refugees who do get out of territories like this, when there's all of a sudden a hostile takeover by some kind of totalitarian regime like the Taliban or like ISIS, 90% of the refugees are men. I think that's shameful. And as tragic as it was, watching some of the video footage of people hanging on to the wheel wells of airplanes and then falling 1,000 feet from a plane out of the sky and dying, smacking against the ground, as tragic as that is, and I don't want to minimize that, all these pictures and all these images, it's men. It's men running away. And I can only imagine, and I am assuming here, okay? So I admit I am assuming, but I think it's a fair assumption that at least some, if not many of these men have wives and children, or mothers, or at least sisters, or nephews or nieces, right? There are some, in some form or fashion, these men have women and children that they bear a responsibility for. And even though the air support is gone, and even though Joe Biden really, really set these guys up to lose, at the end of the day, at least initially, the Afghan forces still outnumbered the Taliban 3-1. And if all they could do is ride in on donkeys with some pistols, waving them around over their head in the air and shoot, okay, well then, does the Taliban have air support? Well, they do now because they got billions of dollars of our equipment because we gave it to them. But initially, when the takeover first started happening, Afghanistan men outnumbered them 3-1. The Taliban didn't have air support. And so we can talk about how Joe Biden really, really messed up this situation and set up Afghanistan for failure. But you can also say, all right, that's unfortunate. That's a tragedy. And Joe Biden is to blame. And yet, at the end of the day, your wives, your children, your mothers, your sisters need your help. They're going to be taken captive. They're going to be tortured. I'll just be frank. They're going to be raped. 14-year-old girls are going to be married, right? Which means forced into marriage and forced into sex, aka raped. All this is going to happen. So, yeah, Joe Biden set you up for a very difficult situation. But at the end of the day, women and children, their lives are on the line. You're a man. They're your women and children. You outnumber them 3-1. Do something. Do something. And now we're hearing stories that there are instances of Afghan men standing up and doing something. And I say, praise God. And I commend those men for taking a stand. But initially, the report that we were hearing is peaceful takeovers. And let me just say this. There is a time where peace is good, and there is a time where peace is an indictment. And I think this applies to the American evangelical church, where it's like, hey, let's just stop being so hostile. Stop. There's so much division in the church and this and that. Can't everybody just get along? Can't we just have unity? Can't we just be at peace? No, when the enemy is at the gates, if they can come through and take over peacefully, that's not something to boast of. That's not a good sign. That's the kind of peace that is not the fruit of the Holy Spirit. That's the kind of peace that is a demonic peace. It is a sign of immense failure on the part of men who, instead of allowing the enemy to take over peacefully, should have given the enemy hell. So the idea of taking over cities in Afghanistan without a single shot fired, that's an indictment. That's an indictment. Regardless of what Joe Biden did. Again, I cannot underemphasize how much blame he bears. However, as a man, you still have to say, okay, this other guy really, really, really made things difficult for me. But this is the situation. This is what I've been given. Fair or unfair, dire or positive, this is the situation. I've got women and children who depend on me. I have to do something. And rolling over and allowing torturous, oppressive, Islamic terrorist to take over your family, your home, your city, your nation peacefully without a single shot fired is a failure. So Joe Biden, that's the first person to blame. Trump, you got to look. I understand Democrats out there. Look, you're going to have to find something else to talk about. Trump has not been the president for about 9 months now. I know you miss him. Right? That's what you did for 4 years. You blamed Trump, but you're just going to have to find a new hobby. We can't blame Trump for everything all the time for the rest of human history. Okay? It's not his fault. It's Joe Biden's fault. After Joe Biden, it's not Trump. I think the Afghan men bear a responsibility. And lastly, this was not mentioned in the question, but the last party that I want to give some blame to is evangelical Christians in America. Because we helped to put Joe Biden in office. We did. Right? David Platt, his book, Before You Vote. John Piper, his article. And don't get me wrong, I love John Piper. I have benefited immensely from John Piper, probably more than any other person. And I'm so grateful. But the article that he wrote about Trump versus Biden was deplorable. Let me just give you a quick recap, just so you remember. He pitted Biden and Trump against one another, and he said, hey, on the one hand, we've got Biden, all right? So we've got Joe Biden, and he's got some really bad policies that don't align with Scripture, like abortion, the murder of unborn children. But then we have Trump, and although he has some good policies, he's arrogant. And arrogance, I mean, can we really underestimate how much of a negative impact the arrogance of Donald Trump has had on the nation, right? And that was basically his argument. And he didn't say, therefore, vote for Biden, but whether he meant to or not, this, I believe, was the fruit of his article. The fruit was that it made a lot of Christians who were going to vote for Donald Trump hesitate, and some of them probably didn't vote for Donald Trump because of John Piper and how massively influential he is. And then it made other people who were on the fence and kind of wanted to vote for Joe Biden but felt guilty because of things like abortion, because these individuals who profess to be Christians consider themselves to be evangelicals. They wanted to vote for Joe Biden because they bought into woke theology and critical race theory and all that kind of stuff, but they still couldn't quite bring themselves to do it because they're like, but the murder of unborn children, it's kind of hard to get past that. And Piper's article, I think, served to assuage their conscience. And so then they did vote for Biden. I think the result, even though Piper didn't say vote for Biden, not Trump, what he did was he called into massive question Donald Trump, and he lightened the negative impact of Biden. What he did was he said, look, these policies are bad over here. Abortion is really bad. But at the end of the day, Trump is just as bad, if not worse. That was the message, at least implicitly. And I think, we'll never know, but I think that article alone, and then you add all the other people who are, I'm not saying John Piper's necessarily woke, but all the other guys who are clearly woke, like Ligon Duncan, like David Platt, like Eric Mason, like Matt Chandler, and all of their teachings for the last, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. You throw all that into the mix. How many evangelical Christians voted for Biden? Was it 5 million? Right? Because how much did he win by? 10 million? So were there 5 million professing Christians in America who voted for Biden? If so, and they had switched their vote and voted for Trump, it would have been a tie. Were there 5 million professing Christians in America who voted for Biden, and how much of that decision was influenced by the pastors in our pulpits in Big Eva? It's foolish. So let me just, real quick, let me just point out the false dichotomy here. All right. So on the one hand, we've got Joe Biden, he's got bad policies, and we've got Trump. And although he has good policies, he's really arrogant. Listen, what this presumes is, and it's implicit, right? It's very crafty. or it's very thoughtless. And I'll give John Piper the benefit of the doubt, right? So we should never, I forget who the quote's from, but we should never attribute to malice what easily can be explained by stupidity. And so because I love John Piper, I'm going to say that he was stupid in this article rather than wicked. I'm just going to say he was stupid. And that is my love for John Piper. It was a stupid article, because the only other alternative is I can say it was a wicked article. And so I'm going to say, because I love John Piper and I'm so grateful for his ministry, that it was a stupid article. And that's my kindness and charity towards him. That is charity. That being said, so let's give it the benefit of the doubt that it was ignorance and stupidity rather than malice and craftiness. But here's the false dichotomy. Here's the ignorance and the stupidity. Trump has good policies, but he's arrogant. Biden has bad policies, but the implication is, but humility. So you have good policy, arrogance, bad policy, but humility. Now, that was never explicitly said in the article, that Joe Biden is humble. But that is the implication. Or at least the implication has to be that, yeah, well, everybody's prideful, because I'm sure John Piper, I've heard him preach, he would say that he's prideful. Everybody's prideful. I'm prideful. Nobody is sinless. And the sin of pride is pervasive. And so there's no person, even Christians, the most sanctified man in this life is not completely free of the sin of pride. I can almost hear John Piper's voice saying that. I know he would agree with that. So he wouldn't say, Joe Biden's humble, but he absolutely in the article implied that Joe Biden is more humble than Trump. You can't get away from that, right? Biden has bad policies. Trump has good policies. And then giving John Piper, again, the benefit of the doubt, they're both prideful, but Trump is significantly more. That's the most benefit of the doubt that I can give to John Piper, right? Good policies, bad policies, some arrogance, but a lot of arrogance. And my whole point is this. So you influenced thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps you, again, collaborating with lots of, it's not all on John Piper, but then a lot of other guys way worse than John Piper, clearly woke, critical social justice preaching guys out there. You collectively convinced not just thousands or tens, but arguably probably at least 1 million evangelicals, maybe 5 million, maybe enough to make the difference, millions of evangelicals, that Trump is so much more arrogant than Biden that you just shouldn't vote at all, or that maybe you even should vote for Biden over Trump. Here's my point. Abortion. Let's just take that one issue. You cannot affirm and stand for, much less defend and actively support and fight for abortion from a place of humility. And here's the problem. This is what, in a nutshell, I'm almost done. In a nutshell, this is the problem. When it comes to the president, what we've done is we've separated the person from their policy. There's the person, then there's the policy. And evangelicals have allowed this to happen. I did this. I just want to take a moment and confess personally. I use this kind of language. I thought this way, and I now recognize that was wrong, and I want to repent. I thought, Trump's got really good policy, but he's not really that great of a person. That is not helpful rhetoric. This, I think, is how we should think of it. There's the person, and that's the overarching category. A man. There is a man in his overall manner of life. The person, there is no severing, Gnostic, weird, mystic. There's the person, and then there's their policy. What is the policy but a reflection of the person? You see? So there's this is how we should think of it. There's the person, and then there's word and deed. And I think this is what the Bible, overall, biblical principles would back up. A person, underneath the person, that's the overarching category, right? The headline is Joel Eben, for instance. I'll just use myself. There's Joel Eben, and then underneath my person, what defines my person, what reflects my person, the makeup of who I am, my person, is my words and my deeds, primarily. You might say, well, what about your thoughts? Well, out of the abundance of the heart and what I think and who I am, it comes out of my mouth. It comes out of that's my whole point. My person is reflected, it is expressed, it is manifest, evidenced by my manner of life, word and deed. So there's the person, this is what I would say, the person And then the two big categories underneath personhood is word and deed. And then we could subdivide word and deed and say there is public word and public word and private word, and then public deed and private deed. And what is policy? Bringing it back to presidents and person and policy. What is policy other than public deed and public word? And let's just make it even simpler. Right? I know there are exceptions here, but let's just say a president's policy is his public deed. And a president's press conferences and Twitter account is his public words. So really what we're saying, we shouldn't say we don't like, Trump's not a good person, but he had good policy. What we should say is both are a reflection of his person. So we should say Trump is an okay person. I don't know. An okay person because his public word isn't great, but his public deed was pretty great. His foreign policy was great. He fought for freedom, lots of things. It was great. So we could say in public deed, pretty great. In public word, not so great. And then even that, I question a lot of evangelicals judging his public word, because evangelicals, at the end of the day, they bow the knee to the 11th commandment, thou shalt be nice. And there are times where there are some things that people, I can't believe Trump said that. And I would go back and look and I'd be like, yeah, I support that. Now, there were some things that he said that I would never say, that are absolutely were inappropriate and ridiculous and certainly not presidential, immoral things to say. But still, again, this is simplified, but there's personhood here, then there's public word, public deed, private deed. Trump's public deed, aka policy, was great. Trump's public word, aka his Twitter account, not so great. Now, what does Jesus say about that? Let's see. I seem to remember a little story from Jesus that talks about two sons, and their father asks them to go out into the field and work, and one of them gives his word. And he says, I'll do it. I'll be there. But then he doesn't show up. And then the other son, he gives his word, but to the contrary, so I'm not going to do it. But then he actually shows up. And then Jesus says, which son did what his father asked? Basically, Jesus is saying, which son is better? Now, of course, there's the hypothetical third son that's not a part of the parable who gives his word, says yes, and shows up, and that would be the best son. But given that son's not in the parable, the two sons that are actually in the parable, the one who says, I'm not going to do it. So in word, he says no, but in deed, he says yes. And then the other one, in word, he says yes, but in deed, he says no. Jesus clearly commends the one whose word fails, but deed succeeds. So when in doubt, and I think certainly with a president, with a leader, a public civil leader, words are important. So I don't want to act like it's inconsequential. It's not. But I'm just saying, if we had to weigh one against the other, I would rather have a president with an annoying and arrogant Twitter account, but with good, freedom-loving, moral policies, both domestic and abroad, that lend towards punishing those who do evil and rewarding those who do righteous, which is the very role of government according to God's word, Romans chapter 13. Trump was a way better president than Biden. A way better president than Biden. And this idea that Biden has bad policy, but he doesn't have arrogance? Are you kidding? Do you want to double down? Do you want to remake that statement now after what we've witnessed in Afghanistan? 5 weeks ago, Biden's saying, no, I don't think it's foolish to pull out. No, I don't think. And why? Why did he pull out so quickly, and why now? Why? Well, because America's been there for 20 years and there's never a good time. No, that's not why. Because he wanted the photo op. Because he wanted to pull out before September 11th, the 20-year anniversary. That's why. That's been admitted. That's why. For his arrogance. That's why. Do you see? I mean, there are videos of Joe Biden. Literally, a guy stands up in a Q&A lecture session at one of his speaking engagements and raises an objection to what Biden's saying. And Biden responds by saying, "Listen, fat." He calls a man as though the man's first name, like his Christian God-given name, is fat. And the man is clearly overweight. That's how Joe Biden talks to people when he doesn't think he's being watched. That's how Joe Biden talks to people. The interviews, you can listen back, what he said would happen in Afghanistan, how he responded to people when they raised concerns that, I don't know if this is wise, I don't know. The man is incredibly arrogant. He's just a little bit more sneaky about it. Donald Trump is arrogant, and it's just like what you see is what you get. There's just, that guy was not, there was just, like the old expression, like, did we teach the boy shame? Like, I don't know, whoever Donald Trump's dad, he did not teach the boy shame. The boy is just, there were things that Trump would say that I would be embarrassed to say. And I'm saying on my bad days, when I'm walking by the flesh and not by the spirit, I would still just be embarrassed, because even from a carnal perspective, it's just like, oh goodness, dude, you are making yourself look bad. So yeah, Trump was blazingly arrogant. But I think that it is just, for one, it's impossible to even measure this. So to make these kinds of statements like John Piper did is incredibly unhelpful. But two, because we can't measure it, we can't see the heart. Man looks at the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. But two, the idea of saying that Trump is more arrogant than Biden, and so much more arrogant than Biden, that Trump's extra arrogance is comparable to the damage of abortion. That is, again, giving John Piper the benefit of the doubt, not saying that it's malice. In charity, I must say again, that is one of the stupidest statements I have ever heard a pastor make. Especially a pastor who knows better, who knows the human heart and its inner workings, who knows the doctrine of sin, who knows that pride can be hidden and masked. Joe Biden, again, we can't measure it, but from what we've just witnessed over the last 5 months, I think that because God sees the heart alone, but man gets a glimpse of the heart, as it were, by seeing what comes out of a man's mouth. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And what we've seen out of the mouth of Joe Biden, when he's not watching Matlock, when he has time to come back from Camp David and actually do a brief conference to talk about COVID, and then at the very end, say something, then turn his back to the reporters and not answer any of their questions about Afghanistan, the thing that people want to know about, and the little bit that Joe Biden has said about Afghanistan over the last week, and what he said about Afghanistan a month prior, his boasting, his confidence, or his, you might call it, arrogance. If we look at that, the last 5-6 weeks of words from Joe Biden, I don't think there's any way to say that Donald Trump, even his most ridiculous tweets at 3 a.m, when it's like somebody should have taken his phone away from him. The guy was ridiculous in his public word, and that does matter. But there is nothing that Trump said, even in his most ridiculous statements, that is in any way more clearly arrogant than what we've seen come out of the mouth of President Joe Biden over the last 5 to 6 weeks. And that's just word. And words matter. But then there's deed. And in terms of deed, it's no contest. Who's the better president? Who lent towards the betterment of the American people and the betterment of every single other nation that loves freedom across the globe? There's no question. There's no question which president indeed was better for the unborn children. There's no question what president indeed in their actions and what they actually did, which is not separate. It's not person and then here's policy. No, policy is public deed, which is a part of your person. Trump was by far the better president, indeed. And in word, I don't know. I think they were both blockheads. But Joe Biden is a sneaky blockhead. And so in some sense, I feel like that's worse. Trump, again, what you see is what you get, right? He is blatantly arrogant. Biden is deceitfully proud, deceitfully arrogant. So in word, I don't know. They're both bad. I feel like even in that, Biden's worse. But even if Biden was better in public word, and I'm not speaking to private with either of them because I don't really know. I know some of it. I know, like Donald Trump, adulterate, right? That would be private deed. And some of the things he said privately, and I don't know. I wasn't there. But the point is, overall, we're looking at the man, right? That was the whole thing with Bill Clinton back in the day. It's like character matters. All of it, though, it falls underneath the person. You are voting for a man, right? No, I'm voting for policy. No, you're voting for a man. And if you think they have good policies, that's a part of being a good man. Good men have good policies, right? Because they do good public deeds. And good men also should have good words publicly with their press conference and their Twitter account and privately with their wife. And good private deeds, right? With their children and the way that they love them. Like a good man is going to be good in all four of these categories. Public deed, public word, private word. And at the end of the day, to say, here's the man, here's his policy, or here's a president and his policy, and then here's his character. No, it's all reflection of the man. And the reality, what I've learned about trees, right? A bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree produces good fruit. Trees, at the end of the day, they don't actually have the power, the ability, the capability of isolating the poison in the root. If they have bad roots, they don't have the ability of isolating that poison in the root to a singular branch. Like only this branch is going to bear bad fruit, and all the other branches are going to bear good fruit, right? So I'm only going to bear bad fruit in my policies, but I'm going to have good fruit in my private deed and private word in my family life. The reality is, if there's bad fruit here, there's probably bad fruit everywhere. And it's maybe just being hidden. But at the end of the day, bad roots, bad fruits, not just on a singular limb, but on all of them. Good roots, good tree, good roots, good fruits, not just on one limb, but on all of them. And so my point is, we can chop it up. There's separate categories: public deed, public word, private word, but all this falls underneath the major category, which is the person themselves. It's all reflection of their character. It's all reflection of the man. That's who we're voting for, is the man. And people will cringe when they hear me say this, but yeah, Trump was and is a better man than Joe Biden. He is. By biblical qualifications, not qualifications for an elder. Trump would not be qualified to be an elder. And you might say, well, then why is he qualified to be the president? Well, because he was more qualified than Hillary. And he should have been the president again because he was more qualified than Biden. And my whole point is to say, evangelicals handed liberals the win, like we always do. Why do we always lose? I don't know, because we've bought into this sick poverty gospel that tells us when we lose, somehow that means we won. I don't know, maybe because of our two kingdom theology. Maybe it's because of our pre-millennial eschatology, that we think like, well, Jesus is going to come back in the bottom of the night. Things are going to get worse and worse and worse. So maybe we can help make it worse by being so foolish and so spineless and so cowardly that we can actually speed up the return of Christ by failing faster. Maybe that's the strategy of the evangelical church in America. I don't know. If so, we're nailing it. If that's the strategy, we're doing great. All right, I've been rambling for the second half of this episode, but I think there are some serious principles in there that you need to consider. This idea of Trump had good policy, but he's a horrible person. And Biden has bad policy, and then the implicit message is, but he's a good person, or he's at least a better person. That false dichotomy, and I'm not saying it originated with Piper, but Piper, man, he has so much influence. A lot of people read that article. But that false dichotomy, this Gnostic idea that separates actions from personhood, and that's all it is with the president. Policy is the actions of the person. That false dichotomy that said Trump has good actions, but he's a lousy dude because I don't like his Twitter account. And then Biden has bad actions, like the bad actions of killing, children in their mother's womb. But he's a good guy, or at least, again, given the benefit of the doubt, he's at least a much better guy than Trump. So much better than Trump that's literally, at the end of the day, this was the argument that was made. Trump's Twitter account is comparable to abortion. At that point, you just, you know what I mean? Like, you got to do what I'm about to do on this podcast. You got to unplug the mic. You got to walk away and sit the bench. You're done. You're done. I don't care who you are. I don't care how big of a name you are, how many books you've written. And I'm grateful for some of these men. But when you start making that statement, the Twitter account is comparable to the murder of children in their mother's womb. You just, I don't know. You've gone senile. You've lost your ever-loving mind. You need to sit down, count backwards from 100, take some deep breaths, and ask God to return your sanity. And just don't write any more articles for a while. Take a time out. Take a break. So whose fault is it? It's Joe Biden's. The Afghan men, I'm so sorry, and praise God for the men who have stood up. But a lot of those men, the fact that the Taliban took over cities without a gunshot, that's an indictment. So there's some responsibility there. And then lastly, evangelicals. We put Biden in office. We did. People who profess to be Christians voted for Biden because it's just this lousy, woke, critical race theory, white supremacists, like all 7 white supremacists. That's the biggest problem in America, sure. We got to get our heads screwed on straight. We've got to repent. We've got to get back to the basics. We got to get back to the law of God, obeying his commandments, making disciples, the Christian worldview, and then, yes, imperialism, exporting the Christian worldview, free gospel of grace that sets men free, that makes free markets and lends towards prosperity, benevolence, kindness, happiness. We got to get back to it. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, we hope that you'll take a moment and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can watch more content like this. Also, take a moment and give this video a like so that it can reach more people. And take a moment and click on the bell so that you'll be notified whenever we come out with new content. Thanks so much. God bless.